Welcome to Divine Love Talk with Dr. Parthenia Grant, where we talk about health, well-being, and the love of the divine that exists in all of us. Now, here's your host, Dr. Parthenia Grant.
Welcome back to Divine Love Talk. Today, I'm so excited to announce the new book by my co-host, Kim Michaels, called The Spiritual Road to Self-Esteem. And I'm also very happy to have my intern here, Vanessa Benjamin. She and I both went over the book this weekend. And Vanessa, you texted me, and what did you think about the book for young people?
It's transformational.
And what did you think in terms of sharing it with other young people?
I thought that this should be like mandatory literature. I mean, for people who are teens or young adults, because, it helps you not waste your life on, fruitless endeavors.
Right?
Yeah.
Which we have a lot of that.
Yeah.
So, Kim, I am so grateful to you for the huge body of work that you managed to put out. I don't know how you do this, but I think that this is one of the most important books right now to help lift the entire planet out of this morass of depression and anxiety and panic and popping pills and
Right.
Stress. I mean, that's like the biggest problem that everyone is encountering. I know certainly I'm dealing with a lot of it that's work-related. So I think that this is one of the panaceas, Kim, for helping people find their way out of the darkness and into the light. So welcome, Kim Michaels.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear you like it.
Oh, you can see we're so excited.
Yeah.
Okay, so Vanessa, I wanted you to go over like some of the things that the people will get out of this book just by picking it up and spending a weekend reading it.
Well, you will learn how to transcend self-defeating beliefs from past trauma. You will reawaken and reconnect with your pure self. You will free yourself from the limiting perception filters that shade your mental and emotional outlook. You will transform your self-condemnation and into self-confidence and unconditional love. You will also let go of guilt, blame, and shame and make the critical decision to accept yourself as worthy of love.
Now that in and of itself is worth reading the book, right?
Right.
And has it already helped you with that?
Oh, yeah. I was pretty lost for a couple of weeks, and this is exactly what I needed. I asked for this, So it helped me get right back on track.
Okay, so in this hour, Kim, I wanted to look at, and I wanted to have you talk about we esteem versus me esteem versus what true self-esteem is. And I also wanted later in the hour to talk about how we can still the outer mind so that we can actually experience God's unconditional love. And Kim, I wanted you to talk to us about the difference between what we think love is and what unconditional love is. But before we go into that, I found a song by Mariah Carey, old school. It's called They Can't Take That Away From Me. And I wanted to do a little intro on that, Eric, because I think it embodies the essence of self-esteem and the light that we have within. You don't remember that. Okay, Kim, I think that that really speaks to true self-esteem. So could you explain to the audience the difference between we esteem and me esteem first?
Yeah, well, often in our society, we are brought up without really having what I call true self-esteem. And instead of that, we go into these two things that I call me esteem and we esteem. And me esteem is really where you are focused on raising yourself up compared to other people. You are trying to stand out from the crowd and say, hey, here I am, I'm better. You know, my parents are richer, I have a bigger car, I have a better education, I have this, I have that. And that's me esteem. And we esteem is kind of the opposite, where you try not to draw any attention to yourself. You try to blend into a group, so you kind of disappear. But you still get a sense of, I'm somebody because I belong to this group. And I think that the obvious problem with both of them is that it is so dependent on other people's view of you. And how can that be self-esteem? You're always looking for validation from somebody else, and that's not what I see as self-esteem, because self-esteem has to come from inside yourself. And it's just like the song was saying, you know, if your self-esteem is dependent on other people's validation, they can take it away because they're giving it to you.
Yes. Well, you know, Guy Ritchie, I always refer people to that movie Revolver because it's very spiritually based. And he says, he calls all of us approval junkies. And I think that that's the epitome of me esteem and we esteem, because even with we esteem, it's like you got to put other people down in order to feel better. You got to make people less than. And then it's the same thing with we esteem. It's our group is superior to your group, or they will ostracize you if you don't belong to the in crowd. It's like the insiders and the outsiders. And if you become an individual and you don't comply with the group or the Borg mentality, then that group will gang up on you, as I know very well. So
yes, just as they will support you if you conform,
yes,
they will turn on you very, very quickly.
Yes, so it's a very treacherous kind of slippery slope, you know, to deal it's like you have to sell your soul to be a part of the we esteem and your identity. And what were you going to say, Vanessa?
Well, I just realized that, you know, it seems like everyone is motivated by these two dynamics. Mm-hmm. You know, I saw it in myself how, you know, maybe I don't want to get out of bed because maybe I shouldn't do something because it's not going to, you know, be praised by someone else, you know, and that's not going to, you know, build
or they're
my
going to disapprove of you.
Exactly. So what's the point of trying anything if, you know, if no one's going to see it or no one's going to like it, you know?
And also, Kim, the other thing is when you're working with the light or in the light, there's always this group that's going to attack you, you know, the accuser of the brethren, you know, it's called in Revelation. And the Alice Miller, this wonderful psychologist, calls it soul murder. If they can't murder you physically, they will murder your soul and they will gang up on you. So it's very, very difficult to let your light shine when it's like the hounds of the Baskervilles are coming after you just for shining it.
Yeah, but it's difficult because we have been tricked into thinking that we have to produce a certain outer result and we have to get a certain reaction from other people. I mean, when you're talking about this letting your light shine, you know, I think that's an extremely important topic for spiritual people, because I have seen it in myself. I've seen so many people who, when they are relatively new to the spiritual path, they are actually seeking to get approval from others by expressing their spiritual beliefs or letting their light shine, as you call it. And that is disastrous, because we in most cases won't get it, because there are so many people that just don't understand the spiritual side of life. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I realized that when it comes to self-esteem, those of us who are spiritual, we're actually worse off than most other people. because because for most of our lives we've had these inner questions that nobody else wants to talk about.
Yes.
We've had a sense of being different, and we have been put down for that.
Yes, and attacked.
And it's harder for us to fit into this big group in society, and that's one reason why, for example, some people get attracted to cults, because when you fit yourself into a cult environment, you get the approval of the group as long as you fit in and don't question it. And that's very unfortunate, and it could all be avoided if people had a deeper understanding, so that when it comes to expressing your light and being who you are, you can't really do it to get approval. You have to do it because it gives you a sense of joy and fulfillment to express who you are. Of course, you have to know who you are first, and that's part of what the book is all about.
Well, and the oracle at Delphi says to know thyself, and the biggest trick that has been pulled on, I think, society is hiding our true self. And that was one of the beautiful things that you reveal in the book, is how you show us a path to finding your true self and your true identity. And as long as that's hidden from, it's not in the educational system, and it's actually condemned for us to be able to teach that, then young people will turn to drugs. They're going to turn to gangs. They're going to turn to alternative methods of trying to find some kind of esteem. You are listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN. I am Dr. Parthenia Grant. I have Kim Michaels as he is my co-host, but I'm also actually discussing his book, The Spiritual Road to Self-Esteem, and I have Vanessa Benjamin, who is reading the book, and she has an insight she wants to share.
I was just kind of going off on what Kim said about how, people who start out in the spiritual, on the path, they first do it to kind of get approval from people, and I think that's probably what I was doing. And now I'm realizing I'm more alienated than I probably ever was before. I don't really have any desire to fit into any group
anymore.
And at the same time, I was like, wow, I'm doing all this stuff and nobody likes me.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And that's a rude awakening, and actually a very good awakening, when you realize that you've been doing things to conform to other people and to get their approval, whether it's your parents or your friends, and they're talking about you behind your back and they don't like you anyway.
Yeah.
So what is the point? You're selling yourself out. And I saw that at a very early age. But Kim, what I loved about your book was the fact that you had the courage to share your personal journey without, going into too much detail. And you also didn't condemn anybody. You didn't condemn yourself. And that's very difficult to do when you're talking about your own personal journey. So I really want to applaud you on how well you did that in the book.
Well, but I think that's also one of the effects of acquiring over time, and for me it took many years, but acquiring a true sense of self-esteem is that you can actually talk about yourself because you're not trying to put on a facade.
Well, we will be back after commercial break with more of The Spiritual Road to Self-Esteem by Kim Michaels, and we will be looking at, in the next segment, how we got caught up in a catch-22 with original sin. Kim, I'd like for you to talk about that. You're listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN. I am Dr. Parthenia Grant. You can find us on Facebook at Divine Love Talk. We're back with more of Divine Love Talk and how you can find that light within you. That was Mariah Carey with They Can't Take That Away From Me. Now, Kim, we're talking to my co-host, Kim Michaels, and his new book, The Spiritual Road to Self-Esteem. And Kim, I think that our light was taken away from us by a lot of the dogma that we bought into through various religions. And I think one of them was the dogma about original sin and how that became a catch-22. I read Joseph Heller's book, Catch-22, years ago, and I thought you did one of the simplest, best explanations of what a catch-22 is. So could you explain that very quickly for the audience and go into how we got caught up in a catch-22 with original sin?
Well, a catch-22 is really a situation that once you got into it, you can't get out of it by your own power because there's something that's stopping you. And that's really what the whole concept of original sin does to us, because it opens us up to this idea that we were flawed from the beginning. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what you've done, because you were created flawed by this God who supposedly is all perfect and all good and who supposedly loves you. But nevertheless, he created you with a fundamental flaw. I mean, I don't know how that makes any sense to anybody, honestly.
It didn't make sense to me either. And so,
no, and I'm just thinking about it now. It's hitting me as I'm saying this, because how does that make any sense that a good God would create you flawed and an omnipotent God somehow screwed up when he created you?
well, and I can see how it got us where we are today because we feel helpless and hopeless.
And unworthy.
And unworthy, but at the same time, we feel like we need to be perfect in order for God to approve of us. So it really is this catch-22. And in Joseph Heller's book, it was about this World War II bomber who wanted to get out of being on this kamikaze mission, where he could get bombed and blown up at any moment. Mm. But the only way he could get out of it was by asking a psychologist to declare him, what was it, insane or mentally incompetent?
Yeah, insane, yeah.
Insane. And then, but then the psychologist says, well, if you have the clarity of mind to say that you're insane, then you're not insane, to ask, to be declared insane. And so it reminded me of how the system that we work under, it's so insane. Right. That it creates these rules that are double binds where you can, if you work within the system, you literally have to go crazy. You have to drink the Jim Jones Kool-Aid, in order to be a part of the system. And most people drink that Kool-Aid. And for those of us who are on the spiritual path, we don't want the Kool-Aid.
And we're the crazy ones.
Yeah, and we're the crazy ones. That's why I wrote the book. I thought I was the crazy one. But that belief in original sin, Kim, how do we extricate ourselves out of it?
Well, I mean, we can do something rationally by realizing that it wasn't an idea that was part of Jesus' original teachings at all. It was added later when the Roman Catholic Church had been formed. And so you can look at that. That's just a historical fact. I'm not trying to knock Catholics or the Catholic Church, but it's just a historical fact. Well, not really the Nicene Creed. It's not in there, but it is in Augustine and the later church teachings. But it wasn't there in Jesus' teachings. He didn't say that we are flawed. Why would he have thought we were flawed when he said, "Fear not, little flock, it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom"?
All right. So when we come back after commercial break, we're going to talk more about the Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. You're listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN. I'm Dr. Parthenia Grant. You can find us on Divine Love Talk on YouTube and on Facebook. We're talking to Kim Michaels and his new book, The Spiritual Road to Self-Esteem. We'll be back with more of The Spiritual Road to Self-Esteem after commercial break.
800-953-5208.
Okay, we're back with more Divine Love Talk on CRN. I'm Dr. Parthenia Grant. You can find us on Facebook at Divine Love Talk and on YouTube. And we're talking about Kim Michael's new book, The Spiritual Road to Self-Esteem. It's available at Amazon. No, I'm sorry. It's available at Barnes & Noble. You want to go out and get a hard copy. Kim, when is it going to be out as an ebook? Do you have a projected date?
Well, it is out right now on Kindle and the iBook store. Last I looked, it wasn't on Nook yet, but it should be coming there very shortly also.
Oh, it's on Kindle. Okay, great. So I know that if it's on Kindle, you can get it from Amazon. Am I correct? You can get
you can get the printed book from Amazon as well.
Okay, so you want to rush out and get it. Vanessa, you said your mom went out and bought her a copy.
Yeah, so we got two. One for her, one for me.
Well, what inspired her?
Well, there's a part in this book that talks about how obesity, there's a spiritual connection. And I was telling her, maybe the reason why you're having issues losing your weight is because it stems from some type of childhood trauma, and she was telling me how she gets anxious anytime that she feels like she's about to starve. And I'm like, well, that comes from your childhood and everything like that.
And feeling like you didn't have enough.
Yeah. And just not having enough food. So
well, that's one of the points that you made in the book, Kim, that was very poignant. And I had to laugh also when you were talking about the importance of looking at not just your spirituality, but your psychology, and how it was even scarier for your family when you decided to go into therapy. It was more scary than you joining a spiritual group. And I know that that's really true in America and within a lot of ethnic groups where they feel like, oh, that means they're coming to take me away in a straitjacket somewhere and I'm really, really crazy. When in effect, like for instance, right now I'm dealing with a lot of stress at work, and so I'm seeing a therapist for post-traumatic stress. And like this show actually alleviates a lot of my stress because this is my passion and I love doing it, and this is my volunteer service to humanity, and we have to find ways to alleviate our stress, and there's so many different kinds and forms of psychology out there that are helpful. So Kim, I really appreciated you being very candid about that as well.
Yeah, but I think we all need therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder.
Don't we?
No, really, because just look at what we just talked about with original sin. If you have grown up in an environment where you have been told from an early age that you are a sinner and that God is an angry God who will condemn you to hell, you are having stress. I mean, this is what worse stress could there be if you really believe in this, you know? And you can say, thank God I didn't have a religious upbringing. But, my parents weren't into original sin whatsoever. They would have probably laughed if you had told them that they were sinners. That wasn't a thought that was in their mind very much. So they didn't put it in mind, naturally.
Well, good.
But when you think about it, we as spiritual people, as I said earlier, we have often been ostracized both by family and friends, and it is very traumatic. If you have a very, very deep inner belief that's very important to you, because it's very important for you to know a deeper truth about life, and yet you are put down for that belief, that is an incredible amount of stress.
Well, and
I really think that... Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and if you add to it, not just put down, but people are actually persecuted all over the world, and in America, no less, for having beliefs that are different from the status quo. I mean, this is 2013, and it's real, and it's happening. It's happening to me.
Mm-hmm. It's happening to an awful lot of people, I think. Even for that matter, what we get from scientific materialism, that our spiritual beliefs are just superstition, and that can also be very traumatic for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people they respond by simply, you can't deal with it. You don't really have a defense against it, so you just have to numb yourself and withdraw from the whole topic of spirituality.
Well,
and I think many people have done that.
Oh, and you talked about the two mechanisms of denial. You said we either go into denial or we go into this fight. And either way, it doesn't help us actually solve the problem. From
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the standard is,
go ahead.
yeah, and the standard is fight or flight, where you try to fight back, and you then get yourself involved with this whole fight with people. I mean, you can see it right now, even publicly. Western civilization there's debate between the new atheists that are very militant in their attacks on religion, and then religious apologists or creationists, and you know, all they can do is fight each other and try and come up with more and more arguments. But I think that most people who are spiritual, they just can't identify with either side. I mean, I don't feel that either side speaks for me whatsoever.
Yes.
And so we really have to find something in between that's a different way. And that's part of what I talk about in the later parts of the book, where we find a deeper approach to life and about who we are, what kind of beings are we.
Well, I think the book is so deep and so profound. You know, Kim, we're going to have to do 2 shows on this book, maybe even 3, because you offer some real-life practical solutions at the end of the book that deserve a show in and of itself. But what I want to touch on, Vanessa, you were saying last night, you know, because you have a hard time sleeping, as do a lot of us, but you said for the first time you slept last night.
Yeah, because usually I literally don't sleep before I do a show or something, so, or even go to school for that matter. So I actually had like restorative sleep, and that's how I know things are getting better for me.
So what can you attribute it to?
Well, a lot of the stuff, you know, that Kim was saying, you know, that there's no need for you to really worry about what other people think, because these are standards that are not God's standards. So why am I, you know, ruminating over something and keeping myself up at night based on something that's an illusion? So after I know that it's an illusion, I can just kind of, you know,
let it go.
Yeah, and sleep.
Now, Kim, that's pretty powerful.
That's very good. I was also thinking about what we talked about a little while ago about original sin and how we overcome it. And I said the first thing is we can rationalize and see it was not in Jesus' original teachings. But the only real way, I think, to overcome that is to actually experience that God loves you.
Yes.
And that God loves you unconditionally. And that's what I talk about also in the later parts of the book. And I describe an experience I had myself, but I also give really some practical advice on how people can come to that point. Because part of what happens with the whole original sin debate is that we are actually conditioned to think that God couldn't possibly love us if we are not absolutely perfect.
Yes.
And that's not what Jesus said. The whole idea of Jesus' teaching and example was that we all have the potential to experience God's love. And that's why he said it's the Father's good pleasure to give you his kingdom, which is unconditional love. And another thing that comes up with our upbringing, whether we're spiritual or not, but I think especially for spiritual people, is that it's like we have this idea that's sort of an offspring of original sin that's floating around out there, that you can actually make such a severe mistake that you could never be redeemed.
Right.
And you could do something so terrible. And this, of course, is, in a sense, it's true, because you can do something that makes people in your group reject you. Mm-hmm. And that's what many spiritual people have experienced. They've been rejected by parents and family, so that's true when it comes to the human realm, but it is actually not true when it comes to the realm of God and our spiritual teachers, because they will not reject us. They will always offer us a way to raise ourselves above our whatever things we have done in the past. And the whole idea of Jesus' teaching, actually, and of the Ascended Master's teachings today, is that whatever you may have done, you can rise above it.
Well, and I think that's an incredible gift, and I think that what really holds a lot of us trapped in this density is this the double-edged sword of free will. We don't understand it, and especially the fact that there are consequences to our actions, and that when we play with the dark, that we have the free will to do it, but we are inviting sort of the Pandora's box of misery and pain and suffering, and separation from God when we move over there on that square, when we could just as easily choose love and oneness. But our teachings, nobody's really stressing that, at a young age, that we have choices and that there are causes and consequences to free will, and that we should use it responsibly.
And that we can always undo a choice.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, we have on the one hand, I think we have traditional religion and the whole idea that we are sinners by nature, and that means you don't really have free will. You didn't choose to have God create you as a sinner, right? And the only way supposedly you can get out of it is that Jesus comes and saves you. But and then you have, on the other hand, scientific materialism that says you are just a highly evolved monkey. And I think you were talking earlier about how young people will go into various negative things if they don't have an alternative. And I think the biggest problem is that the two main belief systems we have don't teach us that life has a purpose, that there is a meaning to life.
Yes.
And I do talk about that
Yes.
throughout the book. I also talk about how we can overcome this sense of the separate self that is always threatened and always is trying to fight somebody. And I think really that this is one of the key ideas, I think, that is coming up in society right now. And I think that the reason why a lot of young people are rebelling against their parents' way of living is that they actually know within that it's time for us as a civilization to step up to a higher worldview.
Yes.
And the parents don't want to do it, and the parents' generation don't want to do it, but the young people feel it. They just don't know where it's going to come from, because they can see it's not going to come from traditional religion. It's not going to come from materialism. What else is there in normal society?
Yeah. We're not offering them any viable or real options. You pointed out in the book that you find it amazing that our society teaches children about technological devices, but does not teach them to operate the device that affects everything they do in life. Would you tell them what that device is, the audience?
Yeah, that's the mind. The mind, the psyche.
And I thought you brought to life so many truths that I think are self-evident, but a lot of people really just kind of overlook that. And it's like we really have got to give young people permission to think. And yet, at the same time, when you do that, I know where I teach, giving students permission to think critically is tantamount to a sin. Yeah. And I get punished for it.
But isn't that greatly ironic when we
Yes.
have an educational system that's based on science, and the very idea of science is open-ended questioning?
Yes.
Science
Right.
tried to distance itself from religion because religion had dogmas that you couldn't question. And we know how the early scientists were persecuted for questioning church dogma.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now we have a scientific system, an educational system, that also has dogmas that nobody's allowed to question.
Absolutely.
What kind of irony is that?
It's a scary irony, because sometimes I feel like, am I back? I feel like the Crucible with Arthur Miller,
Yeah.
like the Salem witch trials, the Inquisition, and it's a resurgence of that today in America, no less. If you don't toe the party line, then the entire group comes and they attack you like a bunch of hyenas attacking a lion.
Yeah.
But it's not really that you are back, Parthenia. It's just that humankind hasn't overcome this tendency to feel threatened by those who are different.
That's very true.
And that has been there always. Why did they kill Jesus? Because he threatened them so much that they couldn't handle it, and they had to get rid of him. And it is ironic that Christianity was later turned into a religion that did the exact same thing to those who questioned its dogmas.
Isn't that interesting?
It's just, but that is what we've talked about so many times, the ego, because the ego is what feels threatened, and it goes into this, it has to remove that threat. And if it can't silence the people that it sees as a threat, it will try to destroy them. And it can't do it physically because we have a civilized society today. It will do it psychologically. Like you were talking about with soul murder. I mean, I have had people who deliberately tried to murder my soul.
Yes.
And it's kind of an amazing experience when you realize that here are people who would destroy you if they could.
Wow.
Oh, and you know, I was in a meeting recently with where a friend came with me to this meeting with these authority figures from the school, and when we walked out of there, he said, "Sweetheart, I am afraid for your life." He said, "If these people don't get you, you know, one way, they're going to make up another way to get you." Yeah. And he was really, really concerned. And those are things that make us want to shut down our light because we are attacked for them. So, Kim, you've got so much to share in your book, and there's so much that I want to cover. I wish the show was 2 hours today. After commercial break, we're going to wrap this up. You're listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN. We're talking to Kim Michaels with his new book, The Spiritual Road to Self-Esteem. You want to go out to Barnes & Noble or Amazon.com and pick up this book right away because it offers some solutions to true, pure self-esteem that no one else has really hit upon. We're back with more of Divine Love Talk on CRN. I'm Dr. Parthenia Grant. You can find us at Divine Love Talk on Facebook and on YouTube. You can also, we're talking to Kim Michaels, my co-host, and his new book, The Spiritual Road to Self-Esteem. You can find this at Barnes & Noble and at Amazon. You want to rush out and get that book. There's so many solutions, Kim, in the second half of the book that next week I want to go over how we can shift from results to process by moving away from a deficit approach and enjoying every step of the journey. That's why I use that movie, The Peaceful Warrior, because he talks about how happiness is in the journey, not the destination. And Kim, I thought you did a wonderful job with that. And you also talked about making the goal not one of instant enlightenment, but switching to a goal of what? What would you say we should switch to instead of trying to get instant enlightenment?
Well, I think we should focus on flowing with life and flowing with all kinds of situations, looking at every situation that comes up as a way to expand our self-awareness. I was running with my tongue sticking out for good 25 years on the spiritual path.
That would be
and
me.
I have to do more, I have to do more, I have to do hours a day. How can I fit more in? How can I do all this? And it just, I came to a point where I actually saw a movie about World War II, and they were talking about how some soldiers get battle fatigue.
Yeah.
And I realized that if I had been a soldier in World War II, I could only have been in a war state of mind, in a war mode, in a battle mode for 5 years. But now I was on the spiritual path, and I was still in battle mode, and I had been so for more than 5 years. And I thought, it's time to change. It's time to stop the war, But see, there's always going to be something in this world you can fight.
Yeah.
And you just have to decide. You can never defeat it. It's not a matter of winning some kind of victory. It's a matter of when you have had enough of the fighting, and you say, I'm just going to walk away from it.
Well,
And for me, the spiritual path was to fight,
So you mentioned moving out of enlightenment to constant self-transcendence, and I can really relate to that, and it was sort of a relief to me to go, oh, okay, so I already understood that education is a lifelong process, and I see myself as a lifelong student, and so when I switched to understanding that spirituality is a lifelong process and that you're constantly self-transcending, then I could, pull myself out of the rat race and stop, looking for this destination mark of enlightenment, and just start enjoying every step of the journey. So we'll be back next week with more of the spiritual road to self-esteem. There's so much to cover in terms of suggestions for young people, for our educational system, and how we can quiet the inner mind. So Kim Michaels, congratulations on your new book, The Spiritual Road to Self-Esteem. I want to encourage everybody to go out and get a copy of this book and sit down with it, and we'll see you next week with more of Kim Michaels and The Spiritual Road to Self-Esteem. You can find him at transcendencetoolbox.com, and you can find us on Divine Love Talk at Facebook and YouTube. Thank you, Vanessa Benjamin, for joining us once again on Divine Love Talk with Sarah Ann.